He was one of the most trusted men in the Roman Empire, a governor sent to tame a wild new land beyond the river Rhine. Under his command marched 3 whole legions, some of the finest soldiers in the world, the pride of the Emperor Augustus. And then, over 3 days in a dark and rain-soaked forest, a man he had trusted as a friend tore everything away from him. 3 legions, with their sacred eagles, were swallowed whole in the mud and the trees, and simply ceased to exist. And their general, seeing that all was lost, drew his own sword and fell upon it. This is the story of the losing side. To understand how 3 Roman legions could vanish in a single forest, you have to begin at the very height of Roman power. The Emperor Augustus had ended a century of civil war and ruled an empire that stretched from Spain to Syria. In the north, the border ran along the great river Rhine, and beyond it lay Germania, a vast land of dark forests and free tribes. For years, Rome's armies had pushed across that river, and it seemed only a matter of time before Germania too became a Roman province. To finish the work, Augustus chose a man he trusted completely, a nobleman named Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was no reckless adventurer, but a smooth and capable administrator married into the emperor's own family. He had governed the rich province of Syria, where he had ruled cities and kings with the stroke of a pen. He was skilled in law and taxes, and the quiet business of turning conquered peoples into obedient subjects. And so he came to the Rhine expecting to govern Germania, just as he had governed the sunlit East. He began at once to hold Roman courts, to hand down Roman judgments, and to demand Roman taxes from the tribes. To Varus, these forests were already a province, and their warriors already beaten men who needed only to be managed. It was a fatal misunderstanding, for Germania was not Syria, and its people had not yet learned to bow. Among the Germans who rode at Varus's side was a young nobleman of the Cherusci tribe, and his name was Arminius. As a boy, he had been taken to Rome as a hostage, and there he had been raised, trained, and made a Roman citizen. He had served in the Roman army, learned its language and its tactics, and even been granted the rank of a knight. To Varus, he seemed the perfect ally, a Roman-made German who could help him rule the tribes from within. Varus welcomed him into his inner circle, trusted his counsel, and dined with him as a friend. But behind that loyal Roman face, Arminius had never stopped being a son of Germania. He watched his people humiliated, taxed, and judged by foreign masters, and in secret, his heart turned to rebellion. Quietly, tribe by tribe, he began to weave a conspiracy to destroy the Roman army from the inside. Another German chief, Segestes, warned Varus again and again that Arminius was plotting treachery. But Varus would not hear a word of it, for he trusted Arminius far more than the man who accused him. The most dangerous enemy of Rome was already seated at the Roman general's own table. As the summer of the year 9 after Christ drew to a close, Varus prepared to march his army back toward the Rhine for the winter. His legions had spent the season deep in Germania, showing the Roman flag and gathering the harvest of taxes. Now the long column would return by the familiar roads to its winter camps along the great river. But Arminius had chosen this moment to spring his trap. He brought word of a small uprising among distant tribes, a minor revolt that needed to be crushed on the way home. It would be easy, he suggested, to turn aside from the safe road and pass through the forest to deal with it. Varus, suspecting nothing, agreed to leave the open country and lead his army into unfamiliar wooded hills. Then Arminius asked leave to ride ahead and gather loyal warriors to support the march, and Varus let him go. The German prince rode out of the Roman camp and straight to the waiting tribes to give the signal for slaughter, and the great column, tens of thousands strong, marched deeper into the trees, exactly where its enemy wished it to go. It was not only an army, but a slow-moving town, burdened with baggage, wagons, servants, women, and children. If the fall of Rome's most trusted general moves you, take 1 second to subscribe and follow him into the forest. The soldiers strung out for miles along the narrow tracks, their long line winding blindly between the dark trunks. Above them the branches closed in, and around them the ground turned soft, wet, and treacherous. Then the sky broke open, and a cold autumn storm came down in sheets upon the struggling column. Rain hammered the men and their shields, the paths dissolved into mud, and the heavy wagons sank to their axles. The proud Roman line lost all its order, breaking into a ragged, stumbling crawl through the trees. And that was the moment the forest itself seemed to come alive. From the wooded slopes on every side, spears and javelins came hissing down out of the rain. German warriors who knew every path struck the column, cut down men and beasts, and melted back into the trees before the Romans could form up. There was no enemy line to charge, no open field to win, only ambush after ambush along an endless line of march. The legionaries, trained to fight shoulder to shoulder in the open, could not bring their discipline to bear in the choking woods. All that first day they were bled from the shadows, unable to strike back at a foe they could barely see. When darkness fell, the battered army threw up a fortified camp and counted its dead by the light of guttering fires. Varus, who had trusted the man who now hunted him, at last understood the full horror of his position. At dawn, the exhausted Romans burned much of their baggage and pressed on, desperate to reach open ground. But there was no open ground to reach, only more forest, more rain, and more hidden enemies growing bolder by the hour. The tribes that had waited in doubt now came swarming to join the kill, until all Germania seemed to be upon them. The column was harried without rest, its rear guard and flanks torn away piece by piece. On the third day the survivors staggered into a narrow defile between a wooded hill and a great black bog. There the Germans had prepared their masterpiece, a long wall of earth and turf hidden among the trees along the path. As the Romans crowded into the trap, the warriors rose from behind the wall and fell upon them from above, penned between the rampart and the swamp, unable to advance or flee. The legions were broken apart and butchered. The cavalry commander tried to cut his way out and ride for the Rhine, but he and his horsemen were ridden down and destroyed. The sacred eagles of the legions, the very soul of each unit, were torn from their bearers and seized by the enemy. Wounded and utterly without hope, Varus saw that his army was beyond saving, and that capture meant only torture and disgrace. Rather than fall alive into the hands of the men he had so badly misjudged, he chose a Roman death. He drew his sword, fixed its hilt against the earth, and threw himself upon the blade. Many of his senior officers, seeing their general dead, took their own lives beside him. The soldiers who still fought on were overwhelmed, cut down in the mud, or dragged away as captives. For the prisoners there was no mercy, only a grim and terrible fate. The Germans led Roman officers to rough altars in the forest and sacrificed them to their gods. They nailed severed heads to the trunks of trees and left the bones of an entire army scattered across the forest floor. Of the 3 legions that had marched in, almost no one came out alive. When the news at last reached Rome, it struck the capital like a thunderbolt out of a clear sky. The Emperor Augustus, old and near the end of his reign, was shattered by the loss. It was said that he tore at his robes, beat his head against the walls, and let his hair grow long in grief. For months, the old man was heard to cry out a single despairing question into the empty halls. Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions. The lost eagles and the shame of the disaster haunted Rome for years to come. So dreadful was the memory that the numbers of the 3 destroyed legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were never used again. Years later, a Roman army returned to that forest and found the whitened bones and the altars still standing among the trees. They buried the dead of Varus's legions, and in time they even won back the stolen eagles one by one. But something far greater had been lost forever in those woods. Rome would raid across the Rhine again, yet it would never again try to make Germania a province. The river that Varus had marched beyond became the lasting frontier of the empire, a line Rome would not cross to stay. Beyond it, the free tribes of Germania remained unconquered, and their descendants would one day help to bring the whole empire down. Arminius, the man who had won it all, was hailed as the liberator of his people. Yet within a few short years he too was struck down, murdered by his own kinsmen who feared he wished to become a king. And Varus, the trusted governor who had ruled cities with a pen, was remembered only for the day he lost an army in the trees. He had believed a friend, taken a shortcut into the dark, and led the pride of Rome to annihilation. This has been the story of the losing side.